Hey guys, welcome to book review 163. Today I am going to be reviewing Sandman in Siberia. Steve and his mom find what they're not looking for by Steve Abbott. Okay, so this book is about a Australian TV personality, Steve Abbott, who is given the opportunity to film a documentary about his travels across Russia. Initially, it's supposed to be sort of a lighthearted thing, but Steve finds out that his relatives, one of his relatives, I think like his great uncle, great uncle maybe, was left behind in Russia in the early 1900s. And so what it evolves into is sort of a reconciliation of the families together, as well as sort of a look within Russia. So it starts out with Steve in Moscow, where he kind of describes, the traffic, the food, the people, talks about his translators, that kind of thing. Actually, that's where he starts his travels. He actually starts the journey kind of backtrack a little bit here. It starts the journey talking about some of his family and how they came to Australia, what they did, what his relatives were, all that kind of thing. Now, speaking of relatives, the one relative that goes with him is his mom, who, like moms all over the world, are very sort of overprotective. He mentions multiple times throughout the book that he's an only child. So there's all that. Oh, and there's also a lot of pictures throughout. There's like a picture from earlier on. Sorry about the traffic, you guys. I didn't really have a good spot to film this, so I'm doing it out here. This is Vasily. This was the great uncle or great uncle that was left behind in Russia when his great grandfather, I think, moved, or maybe great grandfather moved to Australia. They didn't really have the resources to have everybody travel, and so that's sort of how the family got split up. Now, Steve Abbott is a very English name, but this is on his maternal line, both through his mother and his grandmother. So that's why he has a different name. A couple of sightseeing things around Russia. Obviously, the Red Square, St. Basil's Cathedral, the Kremlin. He talks about the Trans-Siberia journey and how they didn't have a translator and kind of the various aspects of that. He obviously didn't do the whole Trans-Siberian journey, but being where his ancestors are from is outside Tyumen, Tyumen. I think he said it was like a 33-hour train journey, so it wasn't anything to shake a stick at. Obviously, when you're on the Trans-Siberian, you're going to have a lot of drinks. It's kind of fairly typical. So they eventually get out to the area where the grandparents lived, and it's actually not in Tyumen, it's in Isharan, I believe. And initially, his relations are kind of weary to see him. These are two of his relations here, and then this is a couple of the translators. See if I can get another picture of some of his relations. Yeah, there you go. There's some more right there. They're initially leery, but they meet up. And kind of the apex of the book is when they go over to these people's houses. Steve actually prevents the documentary team from coming in and filming when they initially meet. He wants to have this as a private moment, which actually causes some friction with the filming team, but I think was quite appropriate for meeting somebody that you never met before. It kind of showed some reserve and showed some class, I guess you'd say. There's a picture of the uncle. The uncle actually died about a year, I think like 6 months or a year after this documentary took place. There's a lot of sort of comic kind of oversights here. I mean, there's a very visual display. That was when they went to the hot mineral bath around Ishikon, I believe. I can't exactly find in here what it says, but this is all around Taimuan. There's another really good picture. Yeah, and here we go. Isham. And kind of a side story that he told was they kind of got lost, two of them, separated from their film crew, and they needed to ride back into town. So they got in a vehicle with a very drunk driver that just swerved all over the place. They didn't know Russian, he didn't know English, they didn't have their translator with them at the time. So Steve really thought he was going to die in a drunk driving accident as a passenger in a drunk driving accident, but they were able to get him to a local church, which then they were able to eventually get back home. The churches throughout kind of, one thing he mentions in this town is that there are churches everywhere, and that he liked to know where his great-great-grandfather was married, but he's never able to actually find it out because all the records were destroyed by the Soviets, and there's so many churches in town that it would be hard to deduct which church his relations actually got married at. The book ends with them kind of going back to Russia, and him performing on a show as the Sandman, as his character, and then flying out of Moscow. I read this in one day. You can see it's a real quick read. It's got a lot of pictures. And if you want kind of a humorous oversight of the Trans-Siberian, of Moscow, of Russia, of a little bit of depth of meeting like family and character, whatever, but don't necessarily want to read like, you know, a giant tome. This is a really quick, entertaining, fun read, and give you some very good insights in a very humorous way of Russia and its people, and both from sort of an entertainment perspective and from a very personal perspective in meeting his family. So that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to leave this review short just because it's not that long a book, but I'll say it again. Sandman in Siberia by Steve Abbott. All right, check it out, you guys. Bye. See you for another review later.